Let me tell you something. There is a very specific kind of silence that happens right before your whole world burns down. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's champagne glasses clinking while someone signs your life away. My name is Avery Caldwell. I'm 32 years old, and the night my parents sold our company for $2.8 billion was the same night they looked me in the face and told me I was disposable. The ballroom at the Seattle Convention Center was dripping in money. Crystal chandeliers. White orchids flown in from God knows where. Politicians, venture capital sharks, tech bros pretending to understand logistics algorithms. And there I was, the ghost in the room. My father, Howard Caldwell, stood center stage with a glass of 18-year scotch like he'd personally invented oxygen. My mother, Delilah, was in diamonds that could fund a small country. My brother, Grayson, was already tipsy, telling a reporter how he led the digital transformation. Led, that's cute. Because while he was popping bottles in Vegas on the company card, I was sleeping on a yoga mat under humming servers rewriting the routing engine that saved the company from bankruptcy. But we'll get to that. Let's rewind to dinner. 3 nights before the gala, we were seated at the 12-seat mahogany table in my parents' waterfront mansion. The kind of house that smells like old money and emotional repression. Howard cleared his throat like he was about to announce a royal decree. We're finalizing the sale to Apex Dominion Capital. $2.8 billion. Delilah clasped her hands. Grayson grinned like he'd cured cancer. Then Howard turned to me. You won't be needed post-acquisition. Turn in your access credentials Monday. Just like that. 10 years of my life reduced to a pink slip. You were always more of a technician, he added. We're stepping into a legacy phase now. A technician. I built the entire operational architecture. But okay, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I calmly removed my key fob and dropped it into my water glass. The fizzing sound was louder than anything I could have screamed. Good luck without your engine, I said. And I walked out. The rain hit my windshield like applause as I drove my decade-old Subaru down Mercer Island. The wipers were struggling. So was I. Except here's the twist. I wasn't heartbroken. I was remembering something. A contract. 10 years earlier, when Caldwell Freight Systems was drowning in debt, I had dropped out of my PhD program in computational systems to save it. I was 22. Stupid loyal. Desperate for my father's approval. Howard had called me into his office, red-eyed and frantic. Payroll taxes are crushing us. We need to reclassify you as an independent contractor. Just paperwork. Just paperwork. He slid the agreement across his desk. I signed it. I thought I was sacrificing stability to save the family. What I didn't realize. I was signing the most powerful document of my life. Because here's a little business law nobody explains at family dinners employees create. Work for hire. The company owns it. Independent contractors, different story. Unless there's an airtight intellectual property transfer clause, the creator owns the code. All of it. And Howard, in his rush to cut costs, missed something critical. A reversion clause. If the company didn't formally purchase perpetual rights within 10 years, ownership reverted back to me. Automatically, I pulled into my tiny one-bedroom apartment and ran upstairs 2 at a time, claws top shelf. Old tax box labeled 2014. My hands were steady now. No shaking, no panic, just math. I found it, blue folder. Slightly yellowed edges. Independent Contractor Agreement. Section 12. Intellectual Property Reversion. I checked the date. April 11, 2014. I checked my phone. April 15, 2024. 4 days past the deadline. 4 days. I leaned back against the wall and laughed. Not hysterically. Strategically. Howard thought he fired an employee. He forgot he was leasing from the landlord. And the lease had just expired. But paperwork alone wasn't enough. I needed proof. Because men like my father don't lose quietly. They rewrite narratives. So I opened my laptop. While Caldwell Freight invested in flashy PR campaigns, I quietly maintained a mirrored repository of the system architecture on my private cloud. Standard disaster recovery protocol. He refused to pay for it. So I did. I pulled up the Git history. If you don't speak tech, think of it as a DNA timeline of every keystroke ever written. I scrolled back 10 years. Green text flooded the screen. Dynamic Root Engine author. Avery Caldwell Fuel Optimization Core author. Avery Caldwell, Fleet AI Integration Author. Avery Caldwell. I filtered for Grayson. 0 commits. 0 code pushes. 0 architectural contributions. The only digital footprint he left in 10 years. A guest Wi-Fi login downloading a 38 GB gaming update in the executive lounge. I stared at the screen. My brother was about to be celebrated as a visionary for downloading video games. Unbelievable. I printed everything: contracts, commit logs, timestamps, version hashes. Each page sliding out of the printer felt like justice warming up. Then I walked to my closet. Pulled out the charcoal power suit I bought 5 years ago, the one I planned to wear when I became CEO. Sharp lines, precision tailoring, no apologies. Tonight wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. I buttoned the jacket, picked up the black folder, and looked in the mirror. The daughter who begged for approval. Gone. The architect. Clocked in. The gala was still roaring when I arrived. Through the glass doors, I could see Howard lifting a pen. Grayson laughing too loud. Delilah glowing under chandeliers. They thought I was home crying. They thought they won. I adjusted my cuffs and stepped toward the VIP entrance. Security stopped me. Invite only. I smiled. Tell Howard Caldwell, the person who built his billion-dollar platform, is here to fix a technical issue. That got their attention, because here's what rich people never understand. You can't erase the person who built the foundation. And I was about to remind them, if you've ever been the one doing all the work while someone else took the spotlight, if you've ever been told you were just the help. Stick with me, because this was only the beginning. Let me paint this real clear for you. There's a moment right before a powerful man realizes he messed up. It's subtle. His smile tightens, his jaw stiffens, his eyes start calculating exits. That moment, I watched it bloom across my father's face from 10 feet away. The ballroom inside the Seattle Convention Center was electric. Investors buzzing. Cameras flashing. A string quartet playing something dramatic and unnecessary. Howard Caldwell stood center stage beside Victor Langley, CEO of Apex Dominion Capital, the firm buying our company for $2.8 billion. Victor was polished. Ivy League confidence. Shark smile. The kind of man who buys companies before breakfast. Howard lifted the pen. My son Grayson will be continuing our legacy under Apex's leadership, he announced. The crowd applauded. Grayson straightened his tux like he'd earned it. I stepped into the aisle, slow, controlled, heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. Heads turned. Howard saw me. For a split second, his eyes softened. Not with love. With irritation. Like I was a fly at a garden party. What are you doing here? He hissed under his breath as I reached the front. Fixing something, I replied. Victor glanced between us. Is there a problem? Howard forced a chuckle. My daughter has been emotional lately. Emotional, that word. Men use it when they're scared of facts. I met Victor's gaze directly. Calm, steady. Before you sign that contract, you might want to verify ownership of the core routing architecture you're acquiring. The room shifted. Not loud, but enough. Victor lowered the pen. Howard's voice dropped an octave. Security. I didn't flinch. Go ahead, I said evenly. But once the deal closes, fraudulent misrepresentation becomes personal liability. That landed. Because here's something billionaires understand very clearly: personal liability. Victor's legal team, standing stage right, immediately perked up. What is she talking about? Victor asked. Howard's jaw twitched. She's a former contractor. She doesn't understand corporate structure. I smiled. Oh, I understand it perfectly. I turned toward the AV booth at the back of the ballroom and gave a small nod. The screens behind the stage flickered. Howard's smile froze. The gala presentation disappeared, replaced by a scanned contract. Independent Contractor Agreement, April 11, 2014, highlighted in red, Section 12I, Intellectual Property Reversion. Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. According to this signed agreement, I said clearly, Caldwell Freight Systems had 10 years to purchase perpetual rights to the routing engine I developed. The deadline expired 4 days ago. Victor's legal counsel was already scrolling on their tablets. Howard stepped toward me, lowering his voice dangerously. You're humiliating yourself. No, I replied softly. I'm correcting the record. The next slide appeared. Git commit logs. 10 years of development history. Dynamic optimization core author. Avery Caldwell Fleet AI integration author. Avery Caldwell Fuel Efficiency Matrix author. Avery Caldwell slide after slide, timestamps, hash IDs, version control trails, irrefutable. Then the final slide, contributor summary. Avery Caldwell 99.7% codebase authorship, Grayson Caldwell 0%. The silence was deafening. You could hear someone drop a champagne flute near the back. Victor slowly turned toward Howard. Is this accurate? Howard's face had gone pale under the chandelier lights. She's twisting. Victor cut him off. Answer the question. Howard didn't. Because he couldn't. And here's the thing about private equity firms like Apex Dominion Capital. They don't care about your family drama. They care about risk. And right now, Howard Caldwell was radioactive. Victor stepped away from the signing table. To be clear, Victor said, voice calm but sharp, if the core proprietary software is not owned outright by Caldwell Freight Systems, this acquisition cannot proceed. The room erupted in whispers. Phones were out now, tech reporters sensing blood. Grayson looked like someone unplugged him. Delilah stood frozen, diamonds trembling at her throat. Howard turned on me, eyes blazing. You would destroy your own family for money. And there it was. The guilt card. The invisible chain. 10 years of being the engine while someone else drove. 10 years of missing holidays, sleeping under servers, rewriting code until my vision blurred. 10 years of being told I was just the back end. I stepped closer. No. I said quietly. You destroyed this family when you decided I was expendable. Victor addressed his legal team. Suspend execution of the agreement pending full IP audit. Howard lunged forward. You can't just. Victor's voice hardened. You represented full ownership of the proprietary routing architecture in your disclosure documents. If that representation is false, this becomes fraud. Fraud. That word echoed like a gunshot. Security shifted, not toward me. Toward Howard. Because suddenly, he wasn't the king of the room. He was the liability. I gathered my black folder calmly and placed a physical copy of the contract into Victor's hand. I'm open to negotiating licensing terms, I said. Professional. Detached. But the software belongs to me. Howard looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Good. The daughter who begged for approval died in that dining room 3 nights ago. Victor studied me for a long moment. You built the system. Yes. Alone. Yes. He gave a slow nod. Well, he said, almost impressed. That changes things. Reporters were no longer whispering. They were recording. Grayson stumbled toward me. Avery, Simon, don't do this. We're family. Family. Where was that energy when they cut me out? When they handed him executive titles and handed me server crashes? I looked him dead in the eye. You were the mascot, Grayson. I was the infrastructure. The AV screens faded to black. But the damage. Done. Victor turned to Howard one last time. We'll be conducting a forensic audit effective, immediately. Howard's empire, built on my brain and his arrogance, was cracking in real time. And I felt something unexpected, not joy, not revenge. Balance. I didn't stay for the aftermath. Didn't need to. As I walked toward the exit, I could already hear lawyers arguing, PR teams panicking, investors recalculating. Outside, the Seattle night air hit my face like freedom. Rain-washed streets, city lights reflecting in black pavement. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't carrying the company. I was carrying myself. And behind those ballroom doors, the man who called me, just a technician, was realizing something terrifying. He never owned the future. He leased it. From me. If you think that was the end. Oh no, that was just the public explosion. The real war started the next morning. Let me tell you something nobody talks about. When powerful people fall, they don't fall quietly. They scramble. They threaten. They rewrite history in real time. And the morning after the gala, my phone looked like a crime scene. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. 3 voicemails from my mother. 1 from my father that was just breathing. I made coffee. Took my time. Sat by the window of my tiny apartment, overlooking the gray stretch of Puget Sound. Because here's the thing about reclaiming your power. You don't rush. You let them sweat. At 9:07 a.m. my phone rang again. Howard Caldwell. I answered. Silence. Then, what do you want? No hello, no apology. No acknowledgement of the fact that he tried to erase me in front of 300 people. Just negotiation mode. I leaned back in my chair. I want acknowledgement of ownership, and I want compensation for 10 years of unpaid intellectual property. His exhale was sharp. You were compensated. I almost laughed. With what? Emotional neglect and expired health insurance. You're being dramatic. There it is again. Dramatic. I swiveled my laptop toward me and opened the acquisition summary documents that Victor's legal team had already sent over for review. They moved fast, because firms like Apex Dominion Capital don't like surprises. And apparently, after the screens went dark at the Seattle Convention Center, their internal compliance team had worked through the night. The audit confirmed it. The routing architecture, the beating heart of Caldwell Freight, was legally mine. Howard's voice lowered. If this deal collapses, you understand what happens to this family. I stared out the window at the rain sliding down the glass. What family? Silence. Then he switched tactics. You think you can run that system alone? You need infrastructure, capital, distribution channels. You needed my brain? I replied evenly. And you had it for a decade. He hung up. No goodbye. Classic. By noon, it was everywhere. Business journals. Industry feeds. 2.8B acquisition stalled over IP dispute. Family. Owned logistics giant faces ownership crisis. Founder's daughter claims core tech rights. Grayson texted, "You're destroying Dad." I typed back, "He did that himself." Then I muted him. Because here's what happens when you stop playing the scapegoat. The system freaks out. Delilah showed up at my apartment at 2 p.m. Yes, my mother. In pearls. In my parking lot. She looked wildly out of place against cracked asphalt and rusted stair rails. When I opened the door, she didn't hug me. She assessed me. "You've embarrassed us." I stepped aside and let her in. She glanced around my small living room like it was a foreign country. "I built the engine of that company," I said calmly. "I own it. You could have handled this privately." I held her gaze. "You fired me privately." That landed. She adjusted her handbag strap. A nervous tick. "Your father is under immense pressure." I walked to my desk and picked up the printed commit logs. These are 10 years of code. 10 years of holidays missed. 10 years of being told I didn't matter. She didn't look at the papers. Because if she looked, she'd have to see it. "You were always so independent," she said quietly. "You never needed praise." I blinked. That might have been the most honest thing she ever said. I didn't need praise. I needed recognition. There's a difference. "You taught me something, Mom?" I said gently. "If you don't claim your worth, someone else will discount it." She stood there for a long moment. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "What are you asking for?" Now we were talking. By 4 p.m., I was in a secure video conference with Victor Langley and his legal team. Victor didn't look irritated. He looked intrigued. "Ms. Caldwell," he said smoothly. "We're prepared to renegotiate." Of course they were. Because here's the cold truth, they didn't want Caldwell Freight. They wanted my software. Howard was just the delivery vehicle. Victor continued. "We propose acquiring the IP directly from you. Separate transaction, equity stake in the merged entity. Executive control over technological development." There it was. The leverage moment. 10 years ago, I would have accepted immediately just to feel valued. Not today. "I'm not interested in being absorbed," I said calmly. Victor's eyebrow lifted slightly. "What are you interested in?" "Licensing." His legal team exchanged looks. I continued. "You license the routing system from me at a recurring rate. No transfer of ownership. No dilution of control. Translation, you rent it from me." Victor leaned back, studying me. "That would significantly reduce projected valuation." "Yes," I replied. "It would." He smiled slightly. "You're very good at this." I held his gaze. "I've been doing this for 10 years. He nodded once. "Give us 24 hours. Meanwhile, Howard was unraveling. I got word from a former operations manager that internal panic had set in. Board members furious. Emergency legal meetings. Insurance carriers asking uncomfortable questions. Because here's what wealthy founders forget. Once you pierce corporate protections, The personal assets get exposed. The waterfront mansion, the investment accounts, the trust funds, all of it suddenly vulnerable. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The city quiet outside, my phone finally silent, and for the first time since I was 22 I felt still. Not reactive, not scrambling, strategic. I wasn't fighting for revenge, I was setting terms. And somewhere across town, my father, the man who once told me I was just the technician, was realizing something devastating. He built a kingdom on borrowed code, and the architect had just changed the locks. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the next move didn't come from my father. It came from someone inside the company, someone who had been watching everything. And what they brought me changed the game completely. Let me tell you something about collapsing empires. They don't fall because of one explosion, they fall because someone inside finally decides to stop holding the walls up. And 2 days after the gala disaster, that someone knocked on my door. 7:42 p.m., no text, no warning. Just a knock that sounded deliberate. When I opened it, I nearly froze. It was Daniel Reyes, Caldwell Freight's chief financial officer, the man who had sat silent at board meetings for a decade while my father steamrolled every decision. Daniel wasn't flashy. No designer suits, no ego cologne, just sharp eyes and numbers running behind them 24/7. "I need 5 minutes," he said. His voice wasn't nervous, it was resolved. I stepped aside. He walked into my small apartment, glanced around once, then placed a slim leather portfolio on my kitchen table. "I should have spoken up years ago," he said quietly. That's when I knew. This wasn't a courtesy visit. This was defection. Daniel didn't sit. He opened the portfolio and slid several documents toward me. Internal memos, board disclosures, insurance filings, and then a draft acquisition disclosure packet submitted to Apex Dominion Capital before the gala. Highlighted in yellow were 2 lines. Company maintains full, exclusive ownership of all proprietary routing architecture and derivative technologies. My eyes went cold. "That's materially false?" I said. Daniel nodded. "I advised Howard to verify your contractor agreement before signing that statement. And he told me it was family business and not to overthink it." Classic. Men who underestimate women always call it overthinking. Daniel exhaled slowly. "There's more." He flipped to another document. Executive compensation adjustments. Grayson's Innovation Leadership Bonus. Don't 18 million over 5 years. My compensation over the same period. Consultant fee. Flat rate. No equity. No royalty. No ownership transfer. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sadness. Clarity. They built valuation projections entirely around your algorithm. Daniel continued. Fuel optimization alone increased EBITDA by 34%. Translation? My brain was the billion-dollar multiplier. And they tried to cut me out. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked. Daniel finally sat down. Because when the audit started after the gala at the Seattle Convention Center, Howard tried to amend historical documentation. My head snapped up. Amend how? Backdated IP assignment drafts. Internal emails suggesting team development. I went still. Forgery adjacent. Desperation phase. But here's the problem. Daniel said calmly. Metadata doesn't lie. He slid over printed server timestamp reports. Attempted document uploads. 2013 M. the night after the gala. Revision logs showing creation dates inconsistent with claimed authorship. Howard had tried to rewrite history. Digitally. I almost smiled. "You can't alter a blockchain timestamp," I murmured. Daniel's eyes flickered with something close to admiration. "No, you can't. Here's what you need to understand up until that moment. This was an IP dispute, messy, expensive, embarrassing. But forgery. That's federal." I looked at Daniel carefully. "Why risk your career?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you built that company, and I'm tired of watching them reward incompetence while weaponizing loyalty." Loyalty. That word again. In dysfunctional systems, loyalty is just unpaid labor with emotional blackmail attached. "You know this could collapse everything," I said. Daniel nodded once. "It already has." By the next morning, I had a forensic tech team reviewing the metadata Daniel provided. Every attempted file revision. Every timestamp. Every unauthorized document upload. And guess what? The digital trail was sloppy. Because when arrogant men panic, they move fast, not smart. Meanwhile, Victor Langley's legal team requested another call. This time his tone was different. Measured. Strategic. "We are aware of potential discrepancies in the disclosure documents," he said. Potential discrepancies. Corporate language for "oh no." "If those discrepancies involve intentional misrepresentation," I replied calmly, "your firm's exposure increases significantly." Victor didn't argue, because he knew. Private equity firms like Apex Dominion Capital survive on credibility. Fraud, contamination. Toxic. "We would prefer to isolate liability," Victor said carefully. Translation? They were preparing to throw Howard under the bus. And honestly, he'd paved that road himself. That afternoon, Caldwell Freight's board called an emergency meeting. Without Howard, without Grayson, without Delilah, Daniel had triggered a governance review. And for the first time in 10 years, the board requested my presence. Not as a daughter, not as a contractor, as the principal IP holder. I walked into the conference room calm, collected, sharp charcoal suit. No emotion on display. Howard wasn't there, which told me everything. A senior board member cleared his throat. "Ms. Caldwell, based on preliminary review, it appears you retain legal ownership of the routing architecture." "Yes. And without it, operational capacity declines by approximately 61%. I didn't blink. "That sounds accurate." They exchanged looks. Fear looks different on wealthy men. It's quieter, more mathematical. "What are your intentions?" another member asked. I folded my hands. "I'm forming a new company." That got their attention. "I will be licensing the architecture under new terms. Transparent governance, profit sharing with engineers, no fabricated leadership titles." Daniel almost smiled. The board member leaned forward. "You would compete directly. I would rebuild correctly." And that's when it hit them. This wasn't revenge. This was evolution. Later that evening, Howard finally called again. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was smaller. "They're pushing me out." I let the silence stretch. "You did that," I replied. "You're my daughter." I closed my eyes briefly. "I was your daughter when I was sleeping under servers at 2 a.m. fixing the system that paid your mortgage." He had no response. Because truth has weight. And he was finally feeling it. But here's where things take another turn, because as the board fractured, as Apex recalculated, as Howard's grip slipped, I received an email from someone unexpected. Subject line, "Interested in building something new." And the sender, not from Caldwell Freight, not from Apex, from one of their biggest competitors. And what they offered was bigger than $2.8 billion. Let me tell you something about power. Real power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It waits, and then it makes you an offer so clean you can see your reflection in it. The email came at 11:16 p.m. Subject line, "Interested in building something new." Sender, Naomi Kincaid, CEO of Stratos Freight Systems. Now if you don't follow the logistics, tech world, let me translate. Stratos wasn't just a competitor. They were the competitor. Faster growth. Cleaner infrastructure. Ruthless execution. And unlike Caldwell Freight, they were known for one thing: they didn't tolerate dead weight at the top. I opened the email. Short. "Avery, what happened at the Seattle Convention Center was impressive. You built the engine. I'd rather fund the architect than buy the broken house. Coffee tomorrow." No flattery, no manipulation, just recognition. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Because here's the dangerous part. When someone finally sees your value, it can feel intoxicating. But I wasn't 22 anymore. I wasn't looking for approval. I was looking for alignment. I replied 9 a.m. Neutral ground. The cafe overlooked Elliott Bay, gray water, cold wind, Seattle doing its moody thing. Naomi Kincaid walked in exactly at 18:59, mid-40s, navy blazer, no-nonsense posture. The kind of woman who didn't need to dominate a room because she already owned herself. She didn't waste time. "You're not interested in selling your IP outright," she said after introductions. "No. You're not interested in being absorbed into Apex." "No." She nodded. "Good." That surprised me. "Why good?" I asked. "Because I'm not offering either." Now she had my attention. Naomi slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, projections. Market disruption models. If my routing architecture integrated with Stratos' existing fleet infrastructure, Operational efficiency would spike 42%. Fuel optimization. Industry leading. Autonomous scaling. Immediate. You don't need Caldwell Freight, Naomi said. You don't need Apex. You need leverage. I stayed quiet. She leaned forward slightly. I'm proposing a joint venture. Not acquisition. Not employment. Partnership. New entity. She continued. You retain full ownership of your core architecture. We integrate under licensing terms. You control tech direction. I fund expansion. My heart didn't race. It sharpened, because this was scale without surrender. What's your angle? I asked calmly. Naomi smiled slightly. Howard Caldwell underestimated you. That tells me he underestimated the future. I invest in the future. Direct. Respectful. Strategic. I liked her. But liking someone isn't a business model. What's equity distribution? I asked. 51% you. I blinked once. Why give up majority control? Because the algorithm is the leverage point. Without it, we're incremental. With it, we're dominant. No ego. Just math, that's rare. Meanwhile, back at Caldwell Freight, chaos. The board had officially placed Howard on administrative leave pending investigation into disclosure irregularities. Grayson, stripped of his innovation leadership title within 48 hours. Turns out when your only contribution is downloading gaming updates on corporate Wi-Fi, you're not exactly indispensable. Apex Dominion Capital had issued a formal statement suspending acquisition talks. Stock analysts were circling like vultures. And in the middle of all that noise, I was sitting across from a woman offering me something radically different. Not inheritance. Not pity. Not guilt. Respect. Why me? I asked Naomi finally. You built something resilient under neglect. She replied. Imagine what you'd build with support. That hit deeper than she probably realized, because for 10 years, I built brilliance inside scarcity. What would abundance look like? I studied the projections again. Joint venture valuation within 2 years, higher than the original $2.8 billion acquisition. Cleaner structure, transparent governance, profit sharing built into engineering teams. No ornamental executives, no mascot leadership. This wasn't revenge. This was evolution. I have one condition, I said. Naomi waited. We'll build compensation structures that reward contribution. No fabricated titles. No family immunity clauses. Naomi extended her hand. Deal. I didn't shake it yet. Draft it, I said. Then we talk. She smiled. You're going to be dangerous. I finally shook her hand. I already am. That afternoon I filed formation documents for a new company. Name, Vectorized Technologies. Not Caldwell. Not legacy bound. Forward motion. Within 72 hours, 3 senior engineers from Caldwell Freight quietly reached out. Then 5 more. Daniel Reyes submitted his resignation and requested a meeting. The walls weren't just cracking anymore. They were migrating. Howard called that night. His voice sounded older. You're poaching my employees. I didn't raise my voice. They're choosing competence. You're burning this to the ground. No, I said evenly. I'm building something better. Long silence. You could have had everything, he muttered. I looked around my small apartment, now filled with draft contracts, architectural diagrams, future plans. I do, I replied. And I hung up. But here's the part nobody expects. Just as Vectorize was about to go public with the joint venture announcement, Apex Dominion made a move. Not against Howard, against me. Because billion-dollar firms don't like losing leverage, and they were about to remind me that corporate warfare isn't personal, it's strategic, and the next strike was calculated. Let me tell you something about billion-dollar firms. They don't lose. If they can't buy you, they pressure you. If they can't pressure you, they try to bury you. And 3 days before Vectorize was scheduled to announce our joint venture with Stratos Freight Systems, I got served. Not with champagne, with legal papers. A courier showed up my apartment at 8:12 a.m., Miss Avery Caldwell. I nodded. He handed me a thick envelope stamped with the name. Apex Dominion Capital. I didn't open it immediately. Because when predators move, they want you to panic. I don't panic. I make coffee. Then I read. Inside was a formal complaint. Tortious interference. Breach of good faith negotiation. Misappropriation of trade secrets. I actually smiled. Trade secrets, the same IP they couldn't legally prove ownership of, Bold. Very bold. They were trying to freeze me. Delay the vectorized launch. Scare off Stratos. Drain my resources before I could scale. Classic corporate containment strategy. My phone rang before I finished page 6. Naomi Kincaid. You've seen it, she said.
Yes.
Her tone was steady. They're trying to spook investors. I figured. Does it change your position? I looked out the window at the low Seattle clouds rolling in. No. A small pause. Good, she said. Because we're not backing out. That's when I knew this partnership was real, not opportunistic, aligned. By noon, my legal counsel had dissected the complaint. Weak footing. No standing on trade secret claims. The IP ownership dispute already favored me. The good faith negotiation? Angle. Fragile. Because Apex had suspended acquisition first. But lawsuits aren't always about winning. Sometimes they're about bleeding. And Howard. He called again. I warned you, he said. Did you put them up to this? I asked calmly. I have no control over Apex anymore. That was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. He sounded cornered. Because here's what most people don't understand. When private equity firms realize a founder misrepresented assets, they don't just walk away. They investigate everything, and while Apex was publicly suing me, they were privately auditing him. Every disclosure, every transfer, every signature. The empire wasn't just cracked, it was under forensic light. The media picked it up fast. IP battle escalates. Tech founder's daughter sued by PE giant. Vectorized launch in jeopardy. Jeopardy? Cute. I called an emergency meeting with Naomi and Daniel. Daniel, now officially resigned from Caldwell Freight, brought updated financial projections. If Apex drags this 6 months, he said, they hope to stall Stratos integration timelines. Naomi crossed her arms. They're assuming we need their approval. We didn't. Because here's the twist: Apex didn't calculate. I never sold them anything. There was no executed agreement, no transferred asset. They were suing over leverage that no longer existed. I leaned forward. We counter. Naomi's eyes sharpened. With what? She asked. I slid a document across the table. Cease and desist draft. Grounds. Defamation and strategic harassment. If they want court, I said calmly, we request expedited discovery. Daniel looked up. That exposes their internal acquisition projections. Exactly. Apex didn't want their valuation models public. Didn't want it revealed how heavily dependent they were on my algorithm. Didn't want investors seeing they miscalculated due diligence. Lawsuits are chess. And I was done playing defense. That evening, as rain tapped against the windows of our temporary, vectorized office space, Naomi looked at me and said something that stuck. You don't fight like someone angry. I shrugged slightly. I'm not angry. What are you? I considered it. Correcting. Because that's what this was. Not revenge, not ego, correction. Howard built a system that rewarded performance theater over performance. Apex assumed control without comprehension. And now, the architect was rewriting the board. The next morning, our counter-filing hit. Public, clean, unapologetic. Within hours, financial analysts started questioning Apex's due diligence process. Investor forums lit up. How did they miss IP ownership? Why file a weak complaint? Is Apex overexposed? The narrative shifted. Not to family drama. To corporate miscalculation, exactly where it belonged. And by the end of the week, Apex requested private mediation. Not court, not headlines. Mediation. Because discovery would have exposed something they couldn't afford. That they built a $2.8 billion valuation on an asset they never verified. Howard showed up unannounced at Vectorize that Friday. No press. No arrogance. Just him. He stood in the unfinished lobby, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. You've won, he said quietly. I tilted my head. This isn't a game. He looked around at the engineers setting up servers, whiteboards covered in architecture diagrams, Daniel reviewing governance drafts. They're all choosing you. I met his eyes. They're choosing merit. A long pause. You could have destroyed me. I didn't soften. You tried to erase me. Silence. Then something shifted in his face. Not pride, not anger, recognition. He finally saw it. The thing he ignored for 10 years. I wasn't the mechanic. I was the machine. But here's the truth. Victory isn't the loud part. The loud part was the gala. The lawsuit, the headlines, the real win, was about to happen quietly, because 2 weeks later, Apex withdrew their complaint. Without settlement, without admission, just gone. And Vectorize, we were about to go public with something that would permanently change the logistics industry. Something bigger than any acquisition. Something Howard never could have built. Because it required one thing he never understood: shared power. Let me tell you something about revenge. It's loud, it's flashy, it makes headlines for about 48 hours. But evolution is quiet, it builds, it scales. And when it finally steps into the light, it doesn't need to scream. 2 weeks after Apex Dominion Capital withdrew their lawsuit, we announced Vectorize. Not with a gala. Not with ice sculptures and string quartets like the circus at the Seattle Convention Center. Just a clean press release. Transparent ownership structure. Open licensing model. Engineer profit sharing baked into the charter. No legacy fluff. No family dynasty branding. Just this built by the architect. Funded for the future. Naomi and I stood in front of a modest media setup in our new downtown office. Floor to ceiling windows. Rain tapping against the glass. Seattle doing its moody aesthetic thing. Reporters expected drama. They wanted family feuds. They wanted me to torch my father publicly. Instead, I talked about infrastructure. About sustainability. About compensating creators fairly. About how intellectual property isn't just paperwork, it's labor. You could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't scandal. This was disruption. Within 48 hours, 7 major freight operators signed preliminary licensing agreements. 7. Because here's what the market had been waiting for: not another acquisition. Not another legacy brand. They wanted performance. And the numbers didn't lie. Vectorize routing efficiency projections showed 38% average fuel savings, 29% faster delivery optimization, 41% reduction in idle fleet time, the same architecture Caldwell Freight had quietly profited from for a decade. Now properly scaled, and because I structured the licensing model instead of surrendering ownership. Recurring revenue. Predictable expansion. Control intact. Naomi leaned over after the third contract closed and said, "You realize you just shifted industry leverage away from private equity, right?" I did, and that was the point. Meanwhile, Caldwell Freight, the board voted Howard out permanently. Grayson resigned to pursue independent ventures. Translation. Nobody would insure him in a leadership role. The company, stripped of the core algorithm, couldn't compete. Within months, it was acquired, not for billions, for scraps. And here's the twist: nobody expected. Vectorize didn't bid. I didn't want the broken house. I already owned the blueprint. One afternoon, Daniel came into my office holding updated growth metrics. "Year 1 valuation projection," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Higher than the original $2.8 billion offer." I didn't smile, I just nodded. Because money was never the validation. Control was. A week later, I got an email from Howard. Short, no subject line. "I misjudged you." I stared at it for a long time. 10 years of emotional scarcity boiled down to 3 words. I didn't respond immediately. Because closure isn't about rushing to forgive, it's about deciding what still deserves your energy. That night, I drove past the waterfront property I grew up in. The lights were off. For sale sign out front. The empire was gone. Not because I destroyed it, because it was built on extraction, not respect. And systems like that always collapse. Back at Vectorize, the energy was different. Engineers weren't afraid to challenge leadership. Meetings weren't performances. They were collaborative. We instituted transparent compensation dashboards, contribution-based equity pools, quarterly open forums where anyone could question executive decisions. You know what happened? Innovation accelerated. Turns out when people feel ownership, they don't coast. They create. One evening, Naomi asked me something over drinks on the rooftop. "If your father had treated you fairly from the start, would you have left?" I thought about it. About the yoga mat under server racks. About holidays missed. About being called just the technician, maybe. But not like this. Not with clarity. "Pain accelerates evolution," I said. She nodded slowly. "Just don't let it define you." It didn't. Because this story was never about proving my father wrong. It was about proving myself right. And then came the moment that hit different. Our first profit distribution cycle. Engineers, the same ones who used to be invisible backend staff at Caldwell Freight, received equity bonuses larger than their previous annual salaries. One of them, a quiet developer named Malik, stopped by my office. "My parents think I'm lying," he said, half laughing. "They've never seen a company do this." I smiled. "Get used to it." That's when it landed. This wasn't about reclaiming my worth anymore. It was about setting a new standard. But here's the thing, success doesn't erase history. It reframes it. Because a month later, I got a call I didn't expect. Not from Howard. Not from Apex. From my mother. And what she asked wasn't about money. It was about something much harder. Let me tell you something about winning. The headlines fade. The valuation climbs. The lawsuits disappear. But the real test is what you do when the noise is gone. A month after Vectorize crossed a valuation higher than the original $2.8 billion acquisition offer, my phone rang at 6:40 p.m. It was my mother. Delilah Caldwell never called casually. She scheduled conversations like board meetings. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Can we meet?" No accusation, no strategy. Just meet. We chose a quiet waterfront restaurant halfway between my apartment and the house that was no longer hers. She was already seated when I arrived. No diamonds this time, no designer armor. Just a navy sweater and a woman who looked smaller, older, human. For a moment we just sat there. The sound of silverware, low conversation, water hitting the docks outside. "You look well," she said carefully. "I am." That wasn't a flex. It was truth. Vectorize had just closed its 12th enterprise licensing deal. Our partnership with Stratos Freight Systems had expanded into 2 international corridors. The governance model we built was being studied by analysts who once dismissed me as a footnote in my father's empire. But none of that was what this dinner was about. Delilah folded her hands. "I didn't understand what you were carrying." That landed heavier than any apology could have. "For 10 years?" I said evenly. "I thought if I just worked harder, he'd see me." She nodded slowly. "He thought you'd never leave." I almost laughed. That's the thing about underestimating someone. You stop imagining a world where they outgrow you. She swallowed. "Your father built his identity around being needed. And when he wasn't, he didn't know who he was." There it was. Not an excuse. An explanation. And explanations don't erase damage. But they do shift perspective. After the gala at the Seattle Convention Center, after the lawsuit from Apex Dominion Capital, after the board removed him, Howard unraveled quietly, not publicly, privately. The man who once commanded rooms now avoided them. "He doesn't blame you," Delilah said carefully. I raised an eyebrow. "He blames himself." That was new. For a long time, I imagined this moment differently. I thought I'd want vindication. An admission. A dramatic apology. But sitting there across from my mother, I realized something. Closure isn't about hearing "I was wrong." It's about not needing to. "Why are you here?" I asked gently. She took a breath. "I don't want to lose you too." Too. Meaning the company. The house. The version of their life built on fragile foundations. For years I had been the invisible one. The back end. The reliable utility. Now I was the one with leverage. And leverage tests character. "I'm not cutting you off," I said calmly. "But I'm not shrinking either." Tears welled in her eyes. "Something I had seen maybe twice in my entire life. We should have given you equity." I held her gaze. "You should have given me respect." Silence. Then she nodded. "You're right." Later that night, I drove past the old waterfront estate one last time. Sold, dark, empty. And I felt nothing. Not triumph, not bitterness. Just distance. Because here's what this whole story was really about: not a $2.8 billion deal. Not corporate warfare. Not lawsuits or headlines. It was about ownership. Not just of code, of identity. For 10 years, I let myself be defined by utility. If I fixed enough systems, maybe I'd earn belonging. If I sacrificed enough sleep, maybe I'd earn love. But love built on performance is a contract with no expiration clause. Until you rewrite it. Back at Vectorize, things were different. We weren't just scaling revenue, we were scaling culture. Profit sharing became standard. Junior engineers presented at strategy meetings. We published our governance model publicly. Radical transparency. Analysts called it disruptive. Competitors called it reckless. Employees called it fair. And that was the metric that mattered. A few weeks later, I got another email from Howard. Longer this time. Not defensive. Reflective. He wrote about fear, about legacy pressure, about how he mistook control for leadership. At the end, he said something that surprised me. I see you now. For years, that's all I wanted. To be seen. But here's the twist: by the time he finally saw me, I had already seen myself. And that changes everything. If you've ever been the one carrying the weight while someone else took the credit. If you've ever been called just the help when you built the foundation. Let me tell you something. You don't need revenge. You need recognition. And sometimes, you're the only one qualified to give it to yourself. I didn't inherit my success. I didn't marry into power. I didn't manipulate my way into leverage. I built something undeniable. And when they tried to erase me, I changed the terms. That's not revenge. That's ownership. And trust me, there's nothing more powerful than that.